And we're back. We took last episode off for the Combat Corner and get a bit of the UFC out of the system, the mixed martial arts out of the system, so that we're that much more excited for its return. And boy, am I excited. The UFC is going to have 3 events within the span of 7 days, starting on January 16th with the premier marquee event, Conor McGregor's return to the octagon, happening on January 23rd, 1 week later. That puts us 19 days out. So let's talk about that first, because how can you not want to talk about Conor McGregor? He's going to be rematching Dustin Poirier, who he knocked out in 2-3 minutes. I don't know how many years, how many moons ago. Owen, what do you think? Conor McGregor is coming back?
Yeah, I really don't know what to say in regards, like, he was retired for what, the second time, and
Fourth?
yeah, well, I don't even know. And there's no more Khabib in this division, so there's kind of a vacuum. The title's kind of up for grabs there, and I guess this fight would have some implications for who gets that shot at the title.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know anything about Dustin Poirier?
I don't know too much. I do know that Connor knocked him out in like 2 minutes way back when, and he's been on a roll since then.
Yeah.
But that's kind of all I know.
Yeah, I wanted to build this segment off of what you, or I guess a more like casual perspective. So that's
Okay.
helpful. Yeah, their first fight happened at featherweight, of course. Conor McGregor. I mean, they were both big featherweights, but McGregor just, there's a couple things that make this interesting. One is he kind of had the touch of death at featherweight. Like, he just had so much power, partly because he was so big. And one question about him is does he still have that power having moved up a division? He has a lightweight knockout of Eddie Alvarez and a welterweight knockout of Cowboy Cerrone, which I guess I'll roll right into the second question, which is anytime McGregor fights, it's such a huge phenomenon. It's no coincidence that the 2 guys who have beat him in the UFC are very mentally tough, Nate Diaz and Khabib Nurmagomedov, both in very different ways, but neither is the sort of man who lets the occasion get to them, whereas Cowboy Cerrone, very much so. Jose Aldo, very much let the occasion get to him. Eddie Alvarez, very much let the occasion get to him. Dustin Poirier, the first time they fought, very much let the occasion get to him. And you know what? I used to discount McGregor's wins because of that. Like, I was just so frustrated. I wanted to see them fight in an empty room with no expectations. So, like, let's see what their combat skills are. But it's just a part of McGregor. He's such a cultural icon. He puts so much pressure on you. The moment of the event is just naturally so big that you really can't escape from that. So overcoming that is a part of beating McGregor. And that is the really interesting thing about this fight, because it's a rematch. Dustin Poirier was not the fighter he was when he lost. He has brought himself to the top of the lightweight division. I'm pretty sure I said in my last Combat Corner, but after his win over Dan Hooker, Khabib Nurmagomedov said, if this is the guy to beat to become the number 1 lightweight contender. And I mean, before that, he has a win over Justin Gaethje. He has a win over Max Holloway, who was on like a 13-fight win streak at the time, moving up to lightweight. The wins over Anthony Pettis and Eddie Alvarez, a bit less impressive in comparison to those first 3 I listed. Still top 10 guys at the time. So has Dustin Poirier done enough, been there enough times that he's added that mental toughness to his game? And also, just does that matter? Like, did he let the moment get to him, or does McGregor's style just match up very well against his? Does McGregor's touch of death at featherweight carry over to lightweight? Those are the 2 biggest questions I have about the fight. Then in terms of title implications, I was really afraid that they were going to make this fight for the belt. they haven't yet, and that encourages and discourages me. I think the UFC really seems to be holding out hope for Khabib's return, which the moment I saw him taking his gloves off after beating Justin Gaethje, I thought, oh, this is it. It's done. We're never going to see him in the cage again, because he's just not the sort of guy. He's the sort of guy who keeps his word. He, I can give so many examples of it, but he doesn't. He retires because he felt like he was done, and I really don't see that changing. One thing that's kind of interesting is Khabib first had the belt wrapped around him through the process of stripping Conor McGregor moments before Khabib stepped into the cage, and then putting that belt around his waist. So I can see the UFC being tempted to just reverse that. Okay, we strip McGregor to give the winner of Khabib's fight a belt. Now we're going to strip Khabib to give the winner of this fight a belt. But from a marketing perspective, it doesn't really make too much sense. If they wanted to sell this as a title fight for the UFC lightweight championship, they, I think, would already be doing that. And there's so much talent at the UFC lightweight division. Charles Oliveira, who just had an amazing performance against Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje, who likewise did the same. The fact that Gaethje turned his whole career around and became one of the scariest guys at lightweight after a loss to Dustin Poirier makes a rematch with Poirier fascinating. But he's talked a lot of shit to McGregor too. So whoever wins the Poirier-McGregor fight, I think, puts themselves in an excellent spot to just build the hype around the lightweight belt. And the lightweight is the premier division in the UFC, in my opinion. So it makes so much more sense to me to not just throw away the long term for one hype short term fight and stretch the title shakeout over a couple more months with a couple more fights, because it's going to be that much more impressive when someone finally gets the belt wrapped around their waist. So I guess I haven't talked about McGregor too much. That's the other part. I I don't know where he is at all as a fighter. He came in, he knocked out Cowboy Cerrone, which, I'm sorry, is just not that impressive to me. That's exactly what he was supposed to do. Cowboy did not want to be there. He never wants to be there in the big moments. McGregor always rises to the occasion in the big moments. I'm not saying I had shoulder blows to head kick called, but Cowboy wilted, and it didn't tell us that much about McGregor and where he's at. So against Dustin Poirier, I won't say the same thing. Whatever happens, Dustin Poirier's been there, done that. The Max Holloway fight was a true coming into his own. He headlined a main event against a guy on a 13 fight win streak and took the interim belt. That was huge for him. And whereas a guy like Cowboy never was able to rise to the occasion, so there's a difference in their records. So I think I can't discount whatever happens in the cage if Conor gets the win, especially without a crowd, or without a big crowd anyway. I'm not sure what the UFC is doing there. So yeah, but also Conor said after that, I want to fight 4 times in 2021, and he could have fought Gaethje. He could have, like, there was no, he could have fought Masvidal. The UFC didn't want to make those fights happen, and I think they resisted him, but I don't think he did his utmost. Obviously, COVID threw a massive wrench into the situation, but if you say, I want to fight 4 times, and then you knock a guy out in 40 seconds, then if you want to fight 4 times, you're getting right back in there, and he didn't do that. So I don't know what his mentality is. I don't know how interested he is in the belt. I don't know what he's going to say exactly, and then I don't know if what he's going to do will match up with what he says. So I'm so excited for this fight. You might be able to guess from what I'm saying. I'd hope Poirier takes it, because I think the UFC men's lightweight division is just better for it if Dustin Poirier is the man moving forward. But this is going to be a huge event, and I can't wait for it. So I guess I'll go backwards in chronological order. I have a lot less to say about this next main event, Neil Magny versus Michael Chiesa. I think this was confirmed as the main event like 4 or 5 days ago. They wanted to do Leon Edwards versus Khamzat Chimaev, but again, that fight was not able to materialize. I guess it's not shocking, only 1 month later. Disappointing, but still an intriguing fight. These two are guys who have both taken their licks in the UFC, both had their struggles, and are both kind of on a resurgence, heading to the top in different ways, as Michael Chiesa moved up to welterweight after struggling at lightweight against Anthony Pettis and Kevin Lee, whereas Neil Magny stayed at welterweight. But after taking a pretty convincing, devastating striking loss to Santiago Ponzinibbio, has looked better, but not against super high quality competition. Li Jinglang, Anthony Rocco Martin, and Robbie Lawler. I think he might have one more win in there. I can't think of, but he's looked very solid, very steady. Whereas Michael Chiesa has just looked very big. He's dominated everyone he's fought. The most impressive at welterweight being Rafael dos Anjos, who was dominated by Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, and Leon Edwards, but those are top 5 guys at welterweight, and he had a very convincing win for me against Kevin Lee at welterweight at least, which showed he could get it done. And then he moved down to lightweight and showed he absolutely still has stuff in the tank, but the story of that fight was just size. Michael Chiesa has just had a size and skill advantage against everyone he's fought at welterweight because he's such a great grappler, and his cardio issues that I think troubled him at lightweight have been holed up by moving to welterweight. So now it's a question, okay, if you don't have a size advantage and you don't have a skill advantage, how can you do? I mean, you might have a skill advantage still, but not the way you had against Mickey Gall or Thiago Sanchez. So that, I'm pretty sure it's 5 rounds. That's an advantage to Magny, who's an absolute workhorse with like 0 cardio issues. And we haven't seen Chiesa's cardio get tested at welterweight, but it was an issue at lightweight. So be interesting to see if the move has really cemented that or it's still lingering. It should be good. I think the winner is Chiesa's probably already a top 10 welterweight through the rankings, but I think the winner is poised to get a crack at like true contention. So the welterweight's always interesting. 2 great fighters who have a lot of experience, should be a great 4-day out appetite satiation for the McGregor fight. But much bigger than that, for me at least, is the return to UFC main event, Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. Do you know anything about Max Holloway?
I've heard the name, and I've definitely seen some of his highlights, but I can't place the face.
Yeah. So I just mentioned him earlier, having lost to Dustin Poirier. If you asked 2 years ago, I guess, was it a year and a half? I think the loss was last 2019 April to Poirier. Before that fight, he was like top 5 pound for pound fighter in the world. He was on like a 13 fight win streak. He'd beaten Aldo handily twice by a TKO in the 3rd round. He'd beaten guys like Ricardo Lamas, Cub Swanson on his way up, Charles Oliveira, Anthony Pettis. And then he put a career feather and cap type performance, crazy beat down on Brian Ortega, who was like an undefeated stud who just soared through featherweight at the time. His Max Holloway's stock really couldn't be higher. And then he loses to Poirier. Oh, well, he was a bit outsized. Then he gets back in there against Frankie Edgar. He was dominant, but it wasn't the same Holloway we saw against, or it wasn't the same type of win we saw against Aldo and Ortega. And that was partly due to Edgar. I don't I think just the way Edgar fought, I don't want to take too much away from Holloway. But then he gets back in there against Alexander Volkanovski. He's lost twice now. So he's lost 3 of his last 4. And that second fight was very, very close, as I talked about on my last Combat Corner episode, but he lost. And when you've lost to the champ twice, it's really going to be really hard to get a third fight booked, most likely. You have to earn it. You have to say, no, I know there's 3, 4, 5 other guys who like deserve a shot, but I'm so much better than them that it makes more sense to give me a third crack at this guy than these guys. And he has his first opportunity to do that against Calvin Kattar, a featherweight who's risen through the ranks pretty handily and surprised me a couple times by looking really great in moments where I wasn't sure about him. He had a great 2020 with wins over Jeremy Stevens and Danny Gay. The Stevens knockout was fantastic. Brutal elbow, straight right to ground and pound, and then like picture perfect straight to put him out. Or maybe I have it backwards. It was a straight to knock him out and an elbow to put him out. Either way. And then took a main event against Dan Ige, a guy who I'm very high on in the featherweight division. And as the rounds went on, just got more and more dominant and put up a very clean, convincing striking performance. The 3rd to 5th round was a spectacular clinic. So this fight should be really fun. You have a guy looking to prove he's still the number 1 guy at featherweight, and a guy who's absolutely shown himself to be a top 5 featherweight. Stylistically, I'll get into it more in my neck when I properly break down the fight, like a couple days out. But it is really intriguing because I think Kattar can do a lot of the things Poirier did to beat Holloway, but he's not going to have the same size and strength advantage that Poirier did, which gives Holloway a bit of an edge. The fact that Kattar went 5 rounds and got more dominant against Ige makes it interesting because that's typically what Holloway does against most of his opponents. So it should be a straight, mostly boxing with a little bit of kicking, 5-round striking show. You could see Kattar pouring on the power, hurting Holloway and like taking the momentum and riding with it the way Poirier did. You could see Holloway weather a bit of a storm and then just pour it right back on or return to form again, like he did against Aldo. I'm just hoping to see like relentless boxing pressure and who's going to break first with like all the footwork, all the technique. It's a perfect fight to get me excited for the UFC's return. I cannot wait. And I think that's how I'll wrap up this Combat Corner. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back to talk some basketball.